right, you guys, we need to talk about the Navy Federal Platinum Card. Because I know whenever I talk about Navy Federal, one of the first questions is always, but what credit score do I actually need to get approved? And with this card, that question it's very interesting because Navy Federal isn't giving you a specific number and saying you need this score to qualify. But when you start looking at the scores people are getting approved around, the limit people are receiving. And then you can look at what this card actually offers. There's a lot we need to talk about here, especially because this is completely different from a card like the More Rewards card. The Platinum isn't really a card you're getting because you're trying to rack up a bunch of points. This is the Navy Federal's lowest interest card, and depending on your situation, that card could actually become more valuable than rewards. So we're going to get into the credit scores we're seeing around approvals, how much you could potentially get approved for, what Navy Federal may be looking at besides your credit score and actually worth applying for in 26. Because I don't want you looking at somebody else's 10,000 or 20,000 approval and thinking, okay, if I have their credit score, I'm getting that as well. Navy Federal doesn't work quite that simple. So let's go ahead and start with the card itself, and then we're getting straight into these approval scores. All right, so before we get into these credit scores and what people are getting approved around, let me show you exactly why somebody would even want the Platinum card in the first place. The biggest thing that separates this card from a lot of Navy Federals other cards is the interest rate. Right now, Navy Federal is advertising the Platinum with a APR ranging from 10.24% all the way up to 18%, depending on your credit worthiness. And 0.24% on the low end is definitely something that caught my attention because we have credit cards out here with interest rates well into the 20s. Navy Federal actually calls the Platinum its lowest rate credit card. There's also no annual fee, so you're not paying $50.75 or $100 just to keep this card in your wallet. But there's something else going on with this card right now that I think is worth knowing. Navy Federal currently has a 0.99% APR for 12 months on qualifying balances made within the first 60 days after opening your account. And they're currently charging no balance transfer with that offer as well. So let's say you already have $5,000 on another credit card with a 25% or 30% APR. If you qualify for the Platinum and under this promotion, that could potentially give you some breathing room to attack that debt without nearly as much interest piling up during that promotional period. But I want to make something very clear here. That 0.99% is a promotion. After the introductory period ends, your standard APR applies. So I wouldn't transfer debt over here and then forget about it. The goal would be to use those 12 months and knock that balance down as much as possible. And another thing I like is that this isn't one of those cards where you're getting hit with fees everywhere. There's no annual fee, no balance transfer fee, and no foreign transaction fee. So this card isn't really trying to win you over with a huge welcome bonus or a bunch of points. The selling point is very simple here, you guys. Keeping the cost of borrowing low. And now that we know why somebody would want this card, let's get into the part I know most of you all came for. What credit scores are people actually getting approved with at Navy Federal? Because it's one thing for us to talk about what is considered fair credit, good credit, or excellent credit. I wanted to see what was actually happening with people applying. And y'all, the numbers are all over the place with the Navy Federal. I'm seeing people getting approved in the low 600s. I'm seeing approvals around 650 and 660. I'm seeing approvals in the upper 600s. And of course, we're seeing approvals in the 700s. But here's what makes this very interesting. I'm also seeing people with higher scores getting denied while somebody with a lower score is getting approved. For example, I found a recent 26 approval experience from somebody reporting a score around 620. Then we have another recent approval reported around 660 FICO score. Another member reporting getting approved around a 670 FICO. And then there's the platinum approval I mentioned earlier. That person reported having a 671 score, no previous relationship with Navy Federal, and they said they were approved for the platinum card with a 20,000 credit limit, you all. Now, before anybody pauses this video and go apply, no. Don't just do that because you have a 671. Remember, these are individual member experiences. But here is where it gets really interesting. I found another recent discussion where somebody reported having a 650 FICO score and receiving pretty nice credit limit. In the same discussion, somebody else said that they had around a 740 FICO score, approximately $100,000 in income, multiple Navy Federal accounts and other products, and they were denied for a credit card, you all. Think about that. Somebody around 650 could potentially receive an approval while somebody over 700 can receive a denial. That tells us something extremely important here. Navy Federal isn't about making their decisions based off of your personal credit score alone. So if you're sitting around 600 to 620, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you cannot get approved. There are approval data points, but I also wouldn't call that a safe approval range. If you're around 650 to 670, that's where I'm seeing some really interesting approval experiences. And once you're 670 and above, you're entering what I will consider good credit. But even at 700 or 720 or even higher, approval still is not guaranteed. And that's why I went and asked, what credit score guarantees me the Navy Federal Platinum? What does my entire credit profile look like? Because apparently, two people can walk into Navy Federal with completely different scores and get results that are the exact opposite of what you would expect. And there's one more thing that we need to talk about here. Because getting approved is one thing. How much Navy Federal actually give you is a completely different conversation. So let's talk about these credit limits. Because this is another reason Navy Federal gets so much attention. And I actually found something directly from Navy Federal that I think a lot of people are going to want to know. The maximum available line on the Navy Federal Platinum is currently $50,000. Yes, $50,000. Now, before anybody gets too excited, that does not mean you're going to apply today and Navy Federal is going to hand you a 50,000 credit limit. That's the maximum available credit line. Actual starting limit is going to depend on what Navy Federal approves you for. And this goes right back to what we were talking about with credit scores. Your credit score can matter, but Navy Federal is also looking at things like your income, your existing debt, your history, and your overall credit worthiness. So somebody with a 700 credit score isn't automatically getting a bigger limit than somebody with a 670 credit score. And remember that example we talked about earlier where somebody reported approved for 20,000, a 671 credit score? That's a great approval, but that's their approval. You could have the same exact credit score and Navy Federal can give you $3,000, $7,500, $15,000, or you could be denied altogether. That's why I don't want anybody watching this video and thinking there's some kind of hack to this. 650 equals this limit, 670 equals this limit, 100 equals $20,000. It does not work like that. Now, let's say Navy Federal approves you, but they don't give you the line you were hoping for. That doesn't necessarily mean you're stuck with that limit forever. Navy Federal does allow members to request a credit limit increase. But here's something else you need to know. Navy Federal says they generally want to see at least 3 months of on-time payments on an existing Navy Federal credit card account before approving any increases. They also say they generally grant credit limit increases on an existing card more than every 6 months. If I got approved for this card with a smaller starting limit, personally, I would not panic. I will use this card responsibly. I'll make my payments on time. I'll keep my balances under control. And I'll give Navy Federal some history to actually look at before worrying about trying to get that huge credit limit. Because I would never get my foot in the door with a smaller limit and build from there, then start applying for multiple cards, trying to chase a $20,000 or a $30,000 approval. And there's actually another Navy Federal rule you need to know before you start applying for multiple cards. Because even if your credit score is good, Navy Federal isn't just going to let you open a card account back to back. Let's talk about it. Navy Federal currently says they will only approve one new Navy Federal credit card per member within a 90-day period. So let's say you just got approved for the More Rewards card 30 days ago and now you're looking at the Platinum. You don't want to turn around and submit another application thinking you're about to get a second card. If you open a Navy Federal credit card account within the last 90 days, Navy Federal says they will decline the new credit card application. They are also currently allow you to be the primary card holder on up to 3 Navy Federal cards with certain expectations like their business and home equity cards. So definitely pay attention to when you open your last Navy Federal card. But there's something I would do before submitting a full application anyways. If you're already a Navy Federal member, you can answer a few questions and see which card you may pre-qualify for without affecting your credit score. And I think that's especially useful if your score is sitting somewhere around 600, 620, 650 or 670 range, you will be wondering whether you should even try for the Platinum. Now, pre-qualified does not mean you're guaranteed to get approved. I want to make that very clear. Once you submit the actual credit card application, Navy Federal will then pull your credit report, which will result in a hard query. And then they will make the final decision. They look at more than just your score. They're looking at things like your credit history, income, and your existing financial obligations. Navy Federal also mentioned your month debt to income. Then discussing pre-qualification versus final approval. So this goes right back to those approval examples that we talked about earlier on in this video. You can have somebody with a 650 get approved and somebody with a score over 700 get denied because we're only seeing the score. You're not seeing everything else Navy Federal sees when that application comes through. So if I were interested in this card, I wouldn't apply just because somebody on YouTube said so, like me or someone else, or on TikTok said so. I got approved with a 620. I'll check my own credit. I will look at how much debt I'm carrying. I'll make sure I haven't just opened another Navy Federal card. I will check pre-qualifications, and then I will decide whether submitting that hard pull application makes sense for me. Now, the final question is, do I actually think the Navy Federal Platinum is worth getting in 26? I think it really depends on what you're looking for in a credit card. If your main goal is earning a bunch of cash back or points every time you swipe your card, this probably wouldn't be my first choice. That's not what the Platinum is designed for. But if you're looking for a card with a lower interest rate, you're trying to get away from some of these cards charging 25% or 30%, or you're trying to pay down an existing balance, this is where the Platinum starts making a lot of sense. Right now, we're looking at APRs as low as 0.24%, no annual fees, no balance transfer, and that current 0.99% reduction APR for 12 months on qualifying balance transfers made within the first 60 days. And Navy Federal actually lists this card as being best for people with average to excellent credit. So if your credit score isn't at 750 or 800, I wouldn't automatically assume this card isn't an option for you. Like we talked about earlier, we're seeing individual approval experiences down in the 600 credit score range. But those approvals also showed us something else. Don't apply based on somebody else's credit score. Your income matters. Your debt matters. Your credit history matters. Your overall profile matters. Your relationship with Navy Federal matters. And that's why I would check Navy Federal's pre-qualification tool first before decide whether I want to submit the full application. But overall, for somebody who values a low APR over flashy rewards, I definitely think the Platinum is one of those Navy Federal cards worth looking at. Now, I would love to hear from you all. If you have the Navy Federal Platinum, drop your credit score around the time you were approved and your starting credit limit down in the comments. I think that's going to help everybody that's watching this video get a better idea of the different types of approvals we're seeing. And if you want me to do another Navy Federal card next and break down the credit scores and credit limits people are getting approved for, let me know which card you want to see next. Make sure that you like this video and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next video.